I will ask all the speakers to come here with us and let this conversation begin. You can say, we brought you this as well. Would you like to have this?
No. Fine. No. Sorry, I'll move out of the way.
Please come. So, I think we've seen bodies, we've heard bodies, we've realized how social bodies can be. So, I would like firstly to have your questions and thoughts for the speakers and let the discussion begin. I think it was very powerful, and I kind of embodied the whole panel, so you probably have things to ask. Who would like to start with a question, and to whom? Miss Anna Fox.
I'm going to try and ask everybody this, but it's more relevant, I suppose, to the practitioners. But I want to know about challenges you might have faced, like public challenges about the work you've made, or in the case of the artists you spoke about, challenges they might have faced, via the public, questioning what you're doing. And I can think of one occasion for Rosy, which is to do with your, I didn't go down for sainthood. I think there were some people that found that a difficult piece to look at. I remember it from Bristol.
Yes. Well, I hope it's difficult. I mean, that's just... I hope it's difficult. I mean, sometimes I think one of the power of images is you can be contesting, you are challenging. It's not just about giving people nice pictures they can enjoy. And I had a real problem, in fact, with that exhibition, because the curator wanted to make it kind of nice, and I said, no, caring isn't nice. And she was worried about how disabled people in the audience might respond. And my point was, yes, but this is a carer speaking, and a carer has the right to speak, and that doesn't mean that it silences the other. It just means all voices need to be heard and all positions need to be given space. Of course it's unsound. We're all supposed to want to be saints, especially if we're born women. So it's a very angry piece of work, but it's pretty.
There were many occasions when I was doing the work early, so in the early 2010s, where any gallery in the island of Ireland that was funded publicly would refuse to show the work, almost apologetically, because the laws north and south were anti-abortion. There was also parts of the law that were anti-sharing information about abortion. So it was artist-led spaces, or the one in Dublin was a privately owned gallery. When I showed the work in Belfast, my protester and her family, she also phoned the Vice-Chancellor of the university and asked for the work to be removed. There was an article in a couple of the newspapers from some senior politicians, so like Nelson McCausland from the DUP, saying that I wasn't an objective academic, and and I've had one of the images that I showed where I was wearing a paper dress with words on it, which reminded me of some of yours. All of those words were the names that I've been called online. So, and my favourite is a high satanic abortion wizard, but and a paedophile and all sorts of things, but I think those words only have power against you if you think that there's any truth in them. And because I'm in an activist group as well, then we're quite supportive. But for a long time, making work about abortion felt like, my original male supervisor told me that I didn't want to be known as the abortion photographer. And I said, well, maybe I do. So, yeah.
not to follow you two, but I love it. I mean, I think with Camille Seaman's work, I haven't actually articulated it, Anna, but I think sometimes it's so beautiful, right? The glaciers, the iceberg, it's almost, you know, for those of us who have spent years in documentary practices or fine art practices or conceptual art, it's really simple just to kind of, at least for me, it's beautiful. You know, there's like, it's almost too beautiful if that's possible. She doesn't see it this way because she's an Arctic, you know, this is what she does. She's a Nat Geo explorer, photographer, but her work has moved into occasional gallery spaces, which is interesting, NGO spaces. It becomes big murals in public spaces, climate, you know, activism. So I guess, you know, for me, I'm still struggling with how her work can be situated for deeper conversations. She also mentioned to me recently that, and she's so full of hope and love, and it's not critical the way, but it's not criticism, but she says now with Instagram, right, there's many more people showing images of these places, and the pictures kind of look similar, almost the same. So she doesn't feel the need to keep making those. So I guess that is related to your question, but I think that's a really important question with work like that, and that's why I wanted to show some of her like video work, which is not work that she made to the intended to be viewed. It's just another way to see the work, or maybe it's a longer time that you have to sit with the work. Yeah, so I'm still kind of working that out, but that's some of the questions that, you know, I think that people have seen that work and maybe it's like, oh, it's so beautiful, but like it's essential to life. Like, can we take a minute to figure out how to work with these pictures? Thank you.
So in my study and in my case, I think the very apparent and heartbreaking challenge for all Chinese photographers, especially women photographers, are the censorship. This is, on the one hand, from the authority, I think, not only, you know, the nudity, the nude body, Asian body, some very harsh realities are kind of forbidden to show in public. Even though some galleries, they want to take risk, they put up the show, they invite the media, press, and the audiences, and in the middle of the exhibition, there could be some policemen coming and shut down the show. And for me, another challenge is from the public. I think because I mean the Chinese public specifically, we are trained for too long to have this ideology in mind, so people are not used to, you know, look at the body, the female body, the mother's body, the Asian body, and talk about these topics in our feminist agendas. I think it's like the both sides play a role in this status quo. Yeah, thank you.
You are? Can you tell us who you are as well?
Me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm Eva Katsaiti and I'm from the University of West Attica. Thank you very much for all the presentations. I was very much taken by things that they were mentioned in all of the talks. I was really interested in the cultural identity collectives that Yang Li mentioned in the work of Annie Lai, and also Rosy, the fact that you talked about acts of defamiliarization, making strange. So I was thinking, if these cultural collectives, if women get together and do acts of okay, you know which word it is, okay, and making strange, they're being activist. But the thing that I have came across is when working in collectives or working in groups or even collaborations, there are like very thin lines there of who is kind of micromanaging relationships and what happens there with equity, with, in women's groups. So can you talk a little bit about these kind of situations where we make groups to be activists, but sometimes we're not that activist in the groups themselves? Because I kind of came across like power relations, and I had problems with situations there that arise, with myself in them too, having the power as an academic. So if you could speak a little bit about that,
So I've probably been in 3 collectives and 3 different activist groups I am in at the moment, and I always feel in the activist groups that my role is a visual communicator most of the time, and I largely sort of stick to a communication role. But in the artist collectives, especially in Areti, I feel incredibly privileged. I feel like all the other artists, I can be funnier in the collective. We used humor. I liked it when somebody else said about taking humor very seriously. And that the power of humor to make a connection with somebody and then throw them something really dark or serious quickly in there. And I think the other power of the women's collective is like 3 of us have kids, and so there's a greater understanding of how to mind that. And they're not without their problems, but I also think even when you're working as an individual artist, you're always collaborating with people and you're always leaning on other people to do different kinds of labour. So it's just a more, I guess, explicit and formalised way of doing that. So I have only good things to say. Yeah.
Maybe I can continue with a very special example. So I worked with a collective of mother artists they're based in Berlin, but they are quite international. They call themselves Maternal Fantasies. And yeah, when I did research about them and read a book review of their publication, and what impressed me most is their way of doing this collective work as a group of mother artists, but also including their 11 children. In their practice, they kind of include their children as the co-creators of the artworks. But in the collective, maybe daily life, they share the responsibilities of caring, cooking. They practice their art in a way that they can live together, work together, and all of those domestic labor, so they can resonate with each other, collaborate with each other, and by producing individual artworks or a project, there is always like a rotate, or we call leadership, or something like managerial role to propose something, and others as the supporters and coordinators, and it's always in turn. So I think they are trying to create this very equal roles in the collective. I mean, this is an artistic collective, but I have limited knowledge about activists, but yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Well, I love working collaboratively, and I know the issues and the problematics, but it's still my preferred practice. Collectives, however, is something else, because I'm old enough to have been through, women's collectives in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And usually I found they were great until they were funded. I hate to say this, it sounds sad, but when they're funded and then the funding gets cut, inevitably there's competition and it's harsh. I was part of a collective called a women's cooperative called Women's Design Service, and we did some brilliant research around women's needs in the built environment. But once the GLC funding went and London Boroughs grant went, and then we had to hassle around for funding. Then, unfortunately, a competition as opposed to collaboration comes to the fore, because basically there's only jobs for half the number of people that were involved. So I think that's one of the problematics, how one keeps working together in a context that maybe isn't as holding and as compassionate as perhaps when you come together because you want to work together, if that makes sense. If you're working together around a common goal, which I did a lot of when I was younger, then it's good. But once it becomes, once there's one job and 3 people fighting for it, it's not so nice. And that's not so surprising. It's called the world. It's called capitalism. But yes, I love working with, because we have the capacity to bounce ideas around, and I actually like listening as well as being heard. I mean, I enjoy the process of empathy. So yeah, I like working in groups.
It's such an interesting question, thinking about so many things. So I'll start personal and then maybe move outward. So I have worked in many collectives, unofficially collectives, just basically people that I want to work with, or that we have a desire to support one another. How do I say this? So I think what has worked really well for me, so in terms of an artist collective, which again is different than an activist group, but there's some overlapping, is being sure that everyone in the group you want to work with and spend time with, which is not always easy if you're new to a town or a place. I also find that varied lived experiences, so a variety of lived experiences, a variety of ages, especially surrounding yourself with older women, I have to say, and a few younger women that you can kind of share the responsibility, because in various seasons of our lives we have different responsibilities and availability of time, and I found that to be really useful, to your point, for shared, there's times when I can get really focused and work on something, but there's times when the 24-year-old might have a little more time, or the woman who's older. So that kind of variety of lived experiences has been really helpful in terms of the hierarchy being non-existent and or shared time, because we're so limited on time. Does that make sense? I'm just thinking about it. I have been in photo collectives that I've actually started where there was a power dynamic that I hate to say it, I love my men in the room, but it's always like a fight for the power. And I left that and took all the people with me that I wanted to work with, and it was fine, because we weren't working out. If there's a struggle, it's not an artist. I don't think it's conducive. In terms of activism, I think it's super important to see what's already been started and join that group, as opposed to starting your own group. I think it's really important in particular to be aware of the work that's already been done before you step into that role, with respect to all the work that's been done, right? Because why reinvent the wheel? You don't have time, but also there's people who've been doing the work for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. I find this I just want to say, I love that you brought it up. I find this on a micro scale as a parent when you walk into a school environment and the new people come in and, they want this. Why don't we have this? And it's like, we've been doing this for 40 years. There's someone else who can tell you how it's been done. Don't waste your time. Does that make sense? And I think in Ronnie's work in particular, as I said, I think all of the answers are right there in those documents on how people do really difficult things. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. That may be more than you asked, right? But I love that question. It's like finding your people. That's the challenge. Once you find them, you hold them, right? Really tight. Thank you.
I wanted to add, thank you, Yang Li, for bringing up the collective maternal fantasies. I just wanted to say we are on a Fast Forward website. We with Anna experimenting with the podcast series, and the second series is ways of doing exactly how women work in photography in different kind of ways. We have a quite wonderful interview with one of the members of Maternal Fantasies, Magdalena, and I really recommend to listen. She exactly talks a lot about this collaboration and what it means work collectively. Just a bit promotion of our podcast.
Who would like to ask something? Two?
Hi, thank you for the talks. I had a slightly tangential question to what has been going on in the discussion. Because bodies has been a through line in all of the presentations. And in most cases, the practitioners are also the ones in front of the lens, the ones whose bodies are being represented. I was interested in the other side of the story. If the practitioners, but also the researchers, could talk about photography itself as a gendered and embodied practice, and talk about your relationship with the camera and how when y'all take photographs, what does the body of the woman photographer, and if at all, what role does that play in the pictures that are being made? If that is something that can be talked about. We are talking about how differently the bodies that are in front of the camera can be represented, but I was also interested in thinking about what is it that the embodied experience of the woman photographer brings to the photographs themselves, if that is at all a possibility to think about. Yeah.
Okay, for this question, I think it's very tough for me because I'm not doing professional photography myself. So I basically do some research and appreciate the women photographers. But I think from my knowledge, I think in front of the camera, women's bodies are like so sensitive. Traditionally very sensitive because it's the lens have this tradition as patriarchal gaze. Even myself are very afraid of in front of the cameras. I think this is the way like what we should honor, starting from the individual experience and the body specifically. When we show our bodies to the one we trust or might not trust yet, and even further to the public, is a huge challenge, especially in my context. So, and myself can feel this nuanced differences because I now reside in Europe and only occasionally go back to my hometown. And I feel this, the different vibe or atmosphere that will subtly influence my conception and perception of body. So yeah, I think that's what I want to say.
Well, I mean, that's kind of where we started back in 1983 when I worked with Joe Spence, because we were exchanging gazes and who was the photographer, who was in front of the camera, in a way was disputed, so that, the work has double credits because we're working with a notion of empathy and a being with and an embodiment. So, okay, I may be photographing Joe, or she may be photographing me, but we are working with women's bodies. And I'm working with an empathy that's deep and understanding. We're critiquing all those other gazes that we've been theorizing we know about, but I won't list them because it's a long list. Yes, and that's where it came from. It came from a desire to say, yes, we're women photographers, we're making photographs about women's bodies. And Jo was looking at cancer, remember, so it was like, that was really heavy shit. And she said, you can't work on aging because you're too young, because I was only 40 or whatever. So, the whole thing about how we look as women and how we gaze upon the other is obviously completely key to my practice, and that's why I put my collaborators' names up when I show the work. and I could equally well share. I mean, I hope you didn't. Sometimes you don't know who's the author. Am I the author because I'm in the picture, or am I the author because I took the picture? And that's in a way been the bane of my life, but it's also interesting. So I really turn this all up on its head.
So I have a couple of thoughts on it. The first one is the project that I did following women's footsteps over to England to travel for abortions. I really felt like that was photography as a performance. So I was re-performing people's movements, and I had their stories with me, and you know, crossing borders. And quite often people probably don't realise, but crossing some of the borders between north and south of Ireland, and then even on the boat over to England, you would quite often get targeted by customs or immigration or whatever if you're there more than once or twice. So I really felt like that was me putting my body where everybody else, where, you know, thousands of people have had to over the last 50 odd years. And then the other work of the appropriate hobby, all the passport butterfly photographs. So Butler talks about assembling bodies to get a recognition of a livable life, right? So you're putting your body in the street, either the new digital street or the literal street, to call attention to a bodily need for a livable, survivable life. And the reason I wanted to photograph so many activists is because the tale of legal change and of legal rights is often credited to the politicians who sign the paper at the very end, and it's very rarely credited to the activists who've been working for decades beforehand. And, you know, Leo Varadkar in Ireland called it a quiet revolution, and it was just because he hadn't been listening. You know, it was very noisy all the time. And so I wanted to draw attention to those people who put their bodies on the line. And the reason I wanted to overlay it with the pictures of what they'd done is calling attention to that other invisible labour, which is the labour of activism. So it's their bodies were included on top of their portraits. So this, the idea of a restitution of labour for the activists. So it was a mixture of my photography and their photography layered together. So it confuses that even more. Yeah.
I loved your talk, by the way. I didn't get to tell you, so thank you. I love this question. I think for me, again, in more of a thinking about documentary or photojournalism, I mean, just simply women have access to women's stories in many parts of the world where their male counterpart couldn't even walk in the room. So I think in that way, we live in a really exciting time. In 2016, I co-founded Women Picturing Revolution with Zareta Lopez-Diago, who's a collaborator. And we really just focused solely on this idea of what stories can be told when women are the photographer. And it was just phenomenal. There's no end. And I think in this case, Ronnie Farley gained access in ways that would not have happened. Also in Fabia's work, specifically speaking about loss of uterus and all of this, definitely. So yes, I mean, I can't say I know so many beautiful photographers of all gender expressions making really lovely, beautiful, thoughtful, collaborative work. But I think this idea of access is key. And I actually feel like your talk in particular, especially with Pixie's work, really, I mean, she's doing something so extraordinary, even though it's with her partner. She's disrupting that gaze completely. I mean, I'm wondering, I don't know, I really felt this question in your talk. So thank you.
We have time for one more, yes.
I'll just ask loudly.
Let's just.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for your presentations. Really interesting. I'm not a photographer. I'm a criminologist. My name is Nicola Groves, and I lecture feminist criminology at Leeds Beckett University in England. So thank you for allowing me to attend today. I just wanted to say that from an interdisciplinary perspective, I'm very interested in the feminist criminological gaze in all of your work in terms of the process of criminalisation that I've seen today. So just in terms of Rosy's work focusing on Clause 28 in the UK, and then just thinking about Emma's work on the criminalisation of abortion in England, and then Leslie talking about what we would term as environmental crime. And then also I was thinking about Yang Li's work, and also, you know, you were talking there about censorship and the role of policemen coming in to, you know, close down exhibitions. And I just make those links and see the process of criminalisation in all of your presentations. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, very inspirational
Yes.
perspective. Thank you.
So one more question, and I think...
No, just something to ask Leslie in turn, and I was very interested in the work of Fabiha, the woman the photographer from Bangladesh, and you said that she used performative, and that there was a kind of a co-creation. And I found that very interesting because very often what happens is that, and of course there are hierarchies of class within a culture as well. So, you know, it's always the photographer who will take the photograph and then the women never get to see those photographs. And classic documentary photography, and I'm talking about ethnographic kind of, you know, just observational documentary, will always just present them kind of working, doing whatever they have to. And I found the performative nature of the pictures very interesting. So I just wondered whether you wanted to say just a little more about that process, if you knew a little more about what she did with the women.
Thank you for that question. Yeah, I had a hard time trying to get all three of those artists in, and that was one of the key things. From what we've only spoken, she came into as a guest lecture in one of my doc classes, and then we spoke over Zoom recently. From what I understand in the more difficult conversations, the image that she's really so proud of is the woman in the water with the duck. Right? So that's a really tough story. She's a duck farmer, or she has ducks, and she's a big swimmer, and she was swimming, and she loved being with her animals, but now she can't do as much with the water. So from what I understand, the photographer asked her, how would you like to be portrayed? How can we tell this story? And she wanted to be in the water, and she wanted to be holding one of her babies, right? So this is the way, I think it's really obvious. So this photographer works, and I also find this to be very interesting, and a possible other theme, is ways in which photographs, so in her case, she's often hired by an NGO or water aid type place where she's sent out. She's had many year-long relationships with these women. So she has to do these more kind of newsy editorial images, which you saw, which in my opinion are less successful. I was kind of, didn't want to show the one where she's holding, you know, like the kind of newspaper portrait work, but I think it's important to show a variety of images. But it's in those more staged images that I feel the collaboration, that I feel the photographer, I feel the woman in the photograph. So what was my point? Oh, I had asked her, you know, how does it work? Do you make the images you need to make, the portraits, and she says she does those very quickly with the women, you know, environmental portraiture. And then she moves into this more collaborative nature, if that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, definitely, like, I would never show anyone's work of someone who's parachuting in any way. These are women who are, but definitely acknowledging race and class and all kinds of privilege that's there in that space. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for caring. You're a wonderful panel. I want to hug each one of you. Thank you, everyone. We'll go on with the next panel at 1. Thank you.